Did you actually see Thurber in the Thurber Carnival?
Didn't. No, I didn't go. I guess I was post my New York phase, wasn't it, when that thing was running? When was it? Late?
Probably 1960.
Yeah,
Yeah.
getting right. No, I didn't. I should have, if I'd been any kind of a fan. But in those days, pre-shuttle, it was a sizable commitment to get to New York from here, from this neck of the woods.
Yeah.
So no, I think it just might have made me sad. He looked more and more like a great big white rabbit, didn't he? And probably was brought on looking like a blinking white rabbit.
That picture of Richard Avedon in the New Yorker.
Almost cruel, as Avedon's photographs are. Yes, it was. It was because it caught the optical distress that he was. But it also was good to remind us that this was a man who overcame a considerable handicap.
That is interesting because he never wore dark glasses. I mean, he didn't give you the, unless of course he was stumbling, but there was a certain amount of he was able to get away with and making you think that he might not be blind.
I don't know how rapidly or the sight left him. Clearly, in the 30s, when he was living with White in that little room, he could see pretty well. I mean, to draw with pen and ink and to make his way back and forth to the restaurants and so on. So it was a very gradual thing, which in a way may be even worse than going blind suddenly. I don't know. So how much actual sight he had, say, in 1950, I don't know. By the time the Avedon photograph was taken, it's that of a pretty blind-looking man.
And I remember Rosemary, his daughter, saw that and she said, "Oh, why'd they use that picture?" She
Yeah.
said that was the eye that always scared me because now it was exposed. And
Was that the blind
I
eye,
guess
by
so.
the
And
way?
then the
The
other
one.
one got also progressively worse, but I think that was maybe even an artificial eye or something like
Hmm.
that.
Hmm.
But also, I remember he had these very long fingers. Do you remember that?
No.
No.
No, but I can believe it. He was a big man. I think the Thurbers as a family were tall and skinny. Probably, I seem to remember that from somewhere. The whole matter of blindness and writing is interesting, whether it makes a certain kind of writer or not. The logomachic tendencies, the fascination with words, certainly you can see in James Joyce's progression. Finnegan's Wake is the work of a man whose words had become his universe, and even Borges, who also went blind slowly, became increasingly sealed into, in a way, a world of words, of poems he had read 50 years ago, of ideas about words and books. So it was a very natural progression that Thurber took. And some of those pieces about words were quite funny, really. They were perfectly acceptable as 3-page or 2-page pieces in the front of the New Yorker magazine. They probably just don't hold up very well. A whole book's worth of them is more than you need.
Right. I guess you had mentioned that in a review of, I guess, Indignations of a Single
Yeah, it
Person.
fell to me to review one of the late Thurber books, and I, who had as a boy worshipped Thurber, then found myself as a grown man kind of panning him, which just goes to show how cruel the literary world is. But I basically felt it was almost the last book assembled in his lifetime, and a lot of the stuff was somewhat lame. But it only made you realize how good the best stuff was, I guess. Uh, it was hard though. I tried to be as loving in my criticism as I could be.
Do you remember the Bernstein book at all?
I'm
About
not
his.
sure I read it, but apparently it really shows him to be quite a miserable guy. I mean, miserable within and sort of miserable to other people too. Is
Well,
that true?
he was a very melancholy, bitter man in a
Hmm.
lot of ways, and I think maybe that's what humorists often are inside. It's hard to make generalizations, but yeah, I think you often hear that that they're that way.
A humorist who was much admired, and by Thurber too, I expect, was Ring Lardner, who certainly could hardly have been more sour in his life style, in his life approach, really. Ring Lardner. Indeed, drank himself to death rather unceremoniously and didn't like too many people, though I guess he was a pretty good father. But yeah, I guess it can be said of humorists. I was trying to think of a happy humorist. Frank Sullivan, now a name not to conjure with, but who was ranked with these giants in his day, seems to have been a relatively serene and happy Irishman that lived in Saratoga and wrote these pieces about the. He's best known for the cliche expert, Mr. Arbuthnot, the cliche expert. He used to testify. Very funny pieces. But no, it's a Thurber. I think Thurber is special though because you feel the gravity of his suffering. His suffering is rather closer to the surface than it is in most humorists, isn't it? He had a way of bringing his anxiety right up there, and his dissatisfactions right into the texture of the humor, which makes him, in a way, a more major writer than many. It was not just a specialized compartment, a kind of little performance you put on, but it was all he had to say, almost, is involved in the humor. The image of Walter Mitty standing around on that street corner alone, dreaming these dreams, is in a way a very poignant, sad image of a human being, isn't it?
It's almost like Thoreau's man living a life of quiet desperation, I suppose, dreaming something else better, or being more self-sufficient as a human being, and the daily gadgets of life force you to.
Brano, who had been a fiction editor and was Thurber's editor, encountering him in the hall right after he had read the manuscript of Mitty. And he was just, dazzled. He really was knocked over by it. And you think of all the New Yorker stories you want to name, that one is certainly in the top 5 or 6 that you can think of. And the day it arrived cold must have been a great day in the life of an editor. Because it is so perfect and so funny sad and so, oddly rich. The quality of those fantasies the man has, Mitty has, are so good.
Did you ever see the Danny Kaye?
I did see the Danny Kaye movie. Danny Kaye has his own merits, of course, but they weren't Thurber's merits. I can see that Thurber would have been very annoyed by that movie.
No, there's actually a tape. The only version of Walter Mitty being acted out that Thurber liked was Benchley doing a radio program in the 40s where he read that.
Really?
And I've been trying to locate that, but...
It'd be fun to see it. The thing about Danny Kaye is that Kaye really is a guy who can do anything, in his prime, as the movie presented him, so that he, it's, in a way, he's very un-Mitty-like, in that he actually can, juggle, dance, sing, whatever, perfect coordination, speak a mile a minute, all that. He is sort of my idea of what I'd like to be. When you fantasize about being somebody, being Danny Kaye wouldn't be the worst way to go. And so it was quite missed the point of the Thurber story. But then what do you expect? You don't expect a movie, especially a movie of a New Yorker short story, to capture its essence. They have to go their own way.
Well, it is hard to translate the written word into screen, isn't it? It's
very.
It's not usually very successful, is it?
Good books make bad movies, and vice versa. Isn't that what they say? Yeah, it's a cinematic. It's a different kind of vocabulary. If you ever see a movie called Being There with Peter Sellers, did you remember that at all? That was a good movie made by the author out of a rather poor book, I thought. I thought it was a very thin book, but the thinness was just enough for the movie. Really, movies don't need an awful lot. You need kind of 90 pages of something, a visual event. So, yeah, something like Thurber's, in which there's real music and psychology and all that.
Did you like the experience of having your things done into movies, or was that a painful...
I was pleased to get the money and the little whiff of celebrity it brings you, but certainly seeing the movies is somewhat painful, yes, because even when they're conscientiously, lovingly made, between what you saw in your mind's eye and what's up there on the screen, the distance is so vast that you feel deranged somehow. Yeah. Yeah,
I'm sorry.
No,
you so carefully describe something, and then a camera does it in 1 second,
In some sense, the author works harder than the movies to describe something, because he has to process it word by word. On the other hand, it's the movie people that have to go out and actually get the plush armchair and the 50s cars and clear the streets, and so there's a tremendous amount of furniture that they will produce, which you didn't picture. When I saw Rabbit Run, I was touched at the way they had tried to authenticate the in my mind, very vague apartment they lived in. So, in some sense, you can cop out with words quite easily. The reader will accept almost any environment, just to get going. He doesn't really want an awful lot of furniture, the reader, to climb over, so that the movies have to deal with all these hard things that a writer doesn't. So, in some ways, it's a revelation to see your own movie or your own book brought to the screen because you finally see it in three-dimension and with the manufacturer's labels all there, everything.
Did you think you ever consciously took any of Thurber into your own work? Do you think that ever?
For such a announced long-term Thurberite, I don't know quite what I learned from him as a writer. Kind of simplicity and naturalness, I suppose, but then you could learn that from any number of writers. Even from the start, I didn't set out to be a humorist, so his way of getting humorous effects wasn't especially real to me, or needed, not necessary. I think I did learn from Thurber, though, is that his fairly humble Columbus
Today, or the topics that you'd be interested in talking to him about?
Be interesting to get Thurber's take on the O.J. Simpson case, I suppose. I don't know. Thurber never struck me as much of a topical commentator. I know he lived in the real world and was aware of political events, but he's rather not very political, as opposed to White, who really did have a strong political conscience. I have no idea what Thurber's views were or how he voted. I suppose he was a liberal. Somehow I feel that. Against censorship, certainly, and probably for helping the poor if it doesn't hurt too much. But other than that, he did seem to pretty much exist in a kind of dream world of Columbus and maybe a little Paris when he was there. I suppose maybe the blindness sealed him in a little earlier than usual. It'd be interesting. I think he probably would, if he were alive, he would continue to read or to be read to, and it'd be interesting to know what he'd made of Robespierre, say, or the whole Nouveau Roman, or because I think, unlike many humorists, he was generally alert to literary currents. He was, in his modest way, a surrealist, after all, and he had this odd way of making anything he drew seem ridiculous, didn't he? Those poems he illustrated, and there's at one point abandoning Thurber animals, he began to draw the real gorilla, as best he could, but he made it all funny. So that was a very surrealist, funny, specialized, modern, I suppose, if not postmodern way of transmuting the world.
Actually, I made a very good point that he wasn't topical, and I think that's probably why he sustained an interest for so many decades. I think, when you do topical stuff, you always...
You perish with it, exactly. You perish with the topical stuff if you're very timely, and it is the timeless in Thurber that will last, or is easiest to read, certainly, without footnotes.
Do you think he would enjoy the New Yorker today?
He felt even under Sean that it was being betrayed. I think he had a very specific sense of what the New Yorker should be, and I can't believe he'd be 100% behind the recent changes. But I don't think he was ever as committed to the New Yorker as an entity, as a cultural presence, as something culturally unique, as, say, Ross and Sean and the two Whites and various other lesser lights in the staff have been. I think he saw it as a place where he could get into print and make his name and make a living, and he was very willing in the end to go out into the wider field of the theater, and he did perform the indiscretion of writing a book about Harold Ross. So I'm not sure his New Yorker loyalty was as intense as, say, that of E.B. White. So maybe he wouldn't much care, I don't know.
I think that's a very good place to stop unless there's something you wanted to add.
Trying to think of anything left. It is to the credit of the people who were running the magazine in the 30s, and Ross above all, but also his advisors, that they could see that they had the imagination to run Thurber's drawings. Because when they were first shown to any editor, the reaction would be, well, yes, these are the sketches, but where are the real drawings? And it was a stroke of genius, of course, for Ross to run them, wasn't it? It really was, and there's never been anything like them since. Naive art, in a way, naive folk art of a kind, but also very sophisticated. He struck in the art as well as in the writing a kind of pitch that was unique to him.
I remember White was very influential getting those drawings.
I think White, yeah, I've seen that related. It was White who picked them up off the floor and inked them in and showed them to Ross. So White deserves a lot of.
What are we going to do with these scrawls? And then they published "Is Sex Necessary" with the drawing, just as you described it. The editor said, "What the hell are these?" And White said, "We're going to do it, or I'm not going to." And then Ross was furious because "Is Sex Necessary" was very popular and everyone loved the drawings, and so he said, "Oh damn it! I guess we got to put these things in now. You're a big star."
Oh, I didn't know that was the route, that Sex Necessary preceded the New Yorker acceptances.
I have to check that, but I think Ross had to see it.
It could well be, but it was a stroke of genius to see that these would work, as they say.
Well, that's great. Listen, I appreciate it very much. It's wonderful.
Glad to oblige. Fun, nice to talk about Thurber. It brings back, I probably left all the things.
Can we just sit down for one moment? What we call room tone.
All right, room tone. Love room tone. Yeah, should write a novel.
It's a nice title.
Yeah, it'd be a good title for something. Exactly. It really would be good. Wonder if it's been used.
Okay.
Everyone still for just about 30 seconds, please. And it's the beginning of room tone. Okay, thanks.
Okay. Also bring you one photograph.
The following is Wild Sound from sound roll number 4.
To feel self-sufficient as a human being, and the daily gadgets of life force you to have to deal with them, and you can never think long enough to go beyond it.
My editor, William Maxwell, and many other people's editor, William Maxwell once described to me seeing Gus Lebrano, who had been a fiction editor and was Thurber's editor, encountering him in the hall right after he had read the manuscript of Mitty. And he was just, dazzled. He really was knocked over by it. And you think of all the New Yorker stories you want to name, that one is certainly in the top 5 or 6 that you can think of. Wasn't especially real to me, or needed, not necessary. I think I did learn from Thurber, though, is that his fairly humble Columbus material was enough and proved to be rich under his handling, and I think it gave me some courage to handle my own Pennsylvania suburban or small town material. That it's any apple will do for a great painting. In other words, something about the kind of affection that he brought his Midwestern upbringing, the scenes of his upbringing, maybe carried over into my own early writing about Pennsylvania.
I think the early use.
Change date.
Yeah, word basically is another question. We're pretty much done.
Do you want to change date?
Yeah.
But I can't describe that about my years in New York, moving as an adult. It's just the feelings are much stronger. They're deeper. They're hidden. I guess.
I get very excited in the town I grew up in,
You rolling, Brian?
even though there's nothing there for anybody else to see, really. And I've had, fans have gone there and they're very disappointed in the town. And it's just the very spaces of the way the houses sit, all that it wells up in me, this sense of being a child and alive, somehow amazing. Everything is kind of amazing and very present, very